Good morning. My name is Ben Glassman. I am the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. Joining me at the podium this morning are Steve Francis, the Special Agent in charge of Homeland Security Investigation, or HSI, for Ohio and Michigan, as well as George Dolce, the Assistant Special Agent in charge of HSI for the Southern District of Ohio, and Resident Agent in charge, Amy Turner, who is in charge of the office here in Cincinnati and Dayton. And we're here this morning to announce federal criminal sexual abuse charges against Kenneth Bernard Pius Hendricks, an American priest originally from Cincinnati who has been doing missionary work in the Philippines. Now, I'm going to, in a moment, explain a little bit more about the charges, and then Special Agent in charge Francis is going to comment and explain how the public can help us in this ongoing investigation. After he gets done speaking, I will then return and answer any questions that you might have. But before I explain the charges, I do want to explain that Mr. Hendricks is charged by criminal complaint. And like any defendant, the allegations in a criminal complaint are just allegations. They're not evidence. And this defendant, like any defendant, is presumed innocent unless and until the United States proves him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in court. So please keep that in mind as I'm explaining the allegations in the indictment. The allegations in the complaint. That said, the allegations in the complaint are quite serious. And in essence, what the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint relates is that last month, 2 Filipino boys went to the Philippine National Police, and they alleged that they were being sexually abused by a priest in the town of Naval in the Philippines. After some investigation, the Philippine National Police contacted Homeland Security Investigation in the Philippines. HSI then investigated, and as of the time of the execution of the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, they had spoken to 5 Filipino boys who told them that they had been sexually abused by the local parish priest in Naval, Kenneth Hendricks. They told fairly similar stories. Each of these victims got to know Father Hendricks through the course of his official work as a priest, whether they were interested in becoming altar boys or through other connections with him through the church. He befriended them. He would invite them to his residence, often to take a bath or a shower. That interaction would then proceed to kissing, and then he would fondle their genitals, masturbate them or masturbate with him, and ultimately have oral and anal sex with the victims. The investigation by HSI determined that Hendricks is in fact a United States citizen. He has a residence in Cincinnati, and although he's been doing missionary work in the Philippines, the investigation indicates that he annually takes trips back to the United States, where he stays for several months each year. The HSI agents working together with the Philippine National Police have arrested Father Hendricks yesterday in the Philippines, in Naval. The Philippine National Police, as well as Philippine immigration authorities, arrested Father Hendricks in coordination and in conjunction with HSI agents and have transported him to Manila in the Philippines, where he is in custody. We are now working with the immigration and law enforcement authorities in the Philippines to determine whether and when and the best way for us to get him to the Southern District of Ohio in order to answer the charges that we're announcing today. Charges that, if Father Hendricks is convicted, carry a penalty of up to 30 years in federal prison. I want to say a couple of things about the case generally. Number one is that the United States has an obligation to protect the most vulnerable. It is a solemn obligation to protect children from sexual abuse. We take that obligation extremely seriously, and the allegations in this case are extremely serious. Number two is, our reach, as you can see in this case, is global. If someone commits a crime, a federal crime that has some connection to the Southern District of Ohio, we are not limited to finding the culprit in the Southern District of Ohio or even in the United States. Rather, working together with our federal law enforcement partners, like HSI in this case, our reach is global. We can catch the offenders, and we will catch the offenders. All of that said, this investigation is open and ongoing, and I'm going to yield the podium to Special Agent in Charge Francis so that he can explain to the public how they can assist with this investigation.
Hi, good morning. I'm Steve Francis, Special Agent in Charge of Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, in Michigan and Ohio. HSI is the principal investigative agency within the Department of Homeland Security and the worldwide leader in the fight against child sexual exploitation. Today's announcement is very disturbing. As U.S. Attorney Ben Glassman has indicated, the seriousness of the allegations against Mr. Hendricks cannot be overstated. On November 13th, our agents assigned to HSI Manila received information alleging that Mr. Hendricks sexually exploited numerous boys residing in Naval, Philippines. Within 23 days of the initial allegation, HSI in Manila and Cincinnati, with the Philippine National Police, the Bureau of Immigration, and the U.S. Attorney's Office here in the Southern District of Ohio arrested Mr. Hendricks. This is a remarkable achievement, considering the logistical coordination efforts and global reach of our law enforcement partners across two countries. Mr. Hendricks holds one of the highest positions of public trust, a Catholic priest. Due to the nature of the charges and the children who have reported sexual abuse, this investigation will be conducted thoroughly and efficiently. No stone will be left unturned. Mr. Hendricks has been active in the church for over 60 years and has been assigned to various locations within the Cincinnati, Ohio area, as well as several locations in the Philippines. The HSI investigation thus far has identified 10 victims, 4 of whom have recently come forward at a town hall meeting in the Philippines. At this point in our investigation, our number one priority is to provide an opportunity to the victims and the witnesses to disclose any contact they have had with Mr. Hendricks. Given what we know thus far, we believe there's a high probability that other children may have been impacted by his alleged actions. Any information given to us will be treated with the utmost respect and discretion, and we will work to assist the victims and witnesses in every possible way. So we're asking for your assistance. If you are aware of Mr. Hendricks' unsupervised contact with children, please contact us immediately. You can contact us at our local HSI Cincinnati office at 513-246-1461. HSI Cincinnati will have victim assistance specialists and forensic interviewers on site to provide support. Again, the HSI Cincinnati phone number is 513-246-1461. Thank you.
Spell your first and last name so it's in the record.
Yes, Steve Francis, Stevefrancis.
Thank you, Steve.
As you can see, we have a picture of Mr. Hendricks here, as well as the phone number that Special Agent in Charge Francis mentioned. We would expect, or we would hope, that any victims who have knowledge or experience with respect to Mr. Hendricks will come forward. With that, I'd invite any questions you might have.
Ben,
Yeah.
so you're saying annually he'd come back to the United States, and he would, several months a year, he would be in the United States. In Cincinnati, where would he come back to? How long would he be here? And what are you looking at here?
So according to the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, we know from international flight records that Hendricks would come back from the Philippines and he would land in the Los Angeles airport. Our investigation indicates most likely that he would go from there to Cincinnati and then would spend a number of months before returning back to the Philippines, where he spent the bulk of the year. So Those specific details are still being determined, and that, as I said, the investigation is ongoing, and if anyone does have knowledge of Father Hendricks, we'd like to know about it.
And so he would act as a priest here? He would be...
Again, I don't want to get into that level of detail. It's the specific affiliations of Father Hendricks with organizations in Cincinnati is a matter that we're working to determine right now.
Ben, just to be clear, no victims from Ohio have come forward.
All of the victims who are referenced in the affidavit in support of the complaint are Filipino. We would like to know whether there are any victims in Ohio or anywhere else in the United States.
You obviously have his address here. I mean, can we get his address or what community he lived in here to give people a better understanding of who this guy was and where he would be if he was here?
I'm not prepared to give a particular street address right now, but we will work to see whether that's something that we can...
What about a neighborhood or a community?
Again, I'm not prepared to give a particular address or community right now, but I will try to follow up if we are able to make that information available.
Was his residence connected in any way to the Archdiocese of Cincinnati?
So, according to the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, the website of the Archdiocese of Cincinnati lists Father Hendricks as a person from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati who is doing missionary work in the Philippines. Now, what specifically that means, both as a legal and a factual matter, is something that we are working to determine now. We are engaged with the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and to date it has been cooperative.
Do you have any reason to believe that the Archdiocese of Cincinnati knew anything about what was going on in the Philippines or alleged abuse, or might have had any knowledge of any activities perhaps here in Cincinnati that heretofore have not come forward?
I don't have any information to answer that question right now, but as I said, the investigation is ongoing, so certainly whatever are the circumstances that caused Father Hendricks to be doing missionary work in the Philippines as opposed to stateside is something that we want to get to the bottom of.
Do you know from flight records every time he was in the United States and every time he was in Cincinnati?
We know from the investigation to date, we don't necessarily know at this point in time when he was in Cincinnati specifically. We know from the international flight records when he would return from the Philippines to the United States.
Are the Archdiocese of Cincinnati and the Franciscan Order in Cincinnati cooperating with the investigation?
To date, we are in, I don't want to specify exactly which organizations we are working with, but I can say that every organization, in terms of the ones that you mentioned in Cincinnati that we've been engaged with, have been cooperative to date, and we would anticipate, we have no reason to think that that won't continue.
Are you facing any charges in the Philippines? I mean, why is this a U.S. jurisdiction?
Yeah, so he has been charged as well, as my understanding, in the Philippines, and so we are working closely with both law enforcement and immigration officials in the Philippines to determine which jurisdiction will proceed against Father Hendricks in what order. I can tell you that I do believe that I want to prosecute this case. In the question of why is this a federal case, the answer is that there is a federal statute that criminalizes a United States citizen either traveling to or residing in a foreign country and they're engaging in illicit sexual conduct, and sexual abuse of a minor counts. That's a federal crime, one count of which is punishable by up to 30 years in federal prison. Right now, Father Hendricks is charged by criminal complaint, so that's the charge that he's facing in the complaint.
Ben, when and where did he become a priest? Was that in Cincinnati?
That is a matter that I'm still trying to get to the bottom of.
Are you aware whether the order, the religious order he's affiliated with, has received any other complaints over the years? Have they indicated this has been a problem to any degree prior to this?
I am not prepared to answer that question here today, but that is the sort of question that I'm very interested in figuring out and getting to the bottom of, and that is what the investigation is working on right now as a second priority. The first priority is making sure that we have found all victims.
What's the timeline for getting him back here? That kind of thing?
Yeah, so We are working on a day-to-day basis, hour to hour, with the authorities in the Philippines. And so after we get done with this press conference, the agents are going to go right back to working on that particular question. I can't give you a specific time frame right now, but I think, as you can see from the time frame in the investigation to date, the first mention of any misconduct came to the attention of the Philippine National Police in early November. Within a week, HSI became involved, and then by the end of the month, we had the criminal complaint, and he was arrested yesterday. So we are moving with all due speed.
Do the Filipinos want to keep him, to prosecute him there? Would
That's,
they prefer that?
that is something that we are working out with them right now.
Do they want to keep him, though? I mean,
I'm not going to speak for that country.
Certainly, we've had in Pennsylvania, we've had the massive investigation by state and federal authorities over there. In the Southern District of Ohio, is there any consideration given to any kind of wider scope investigation of alleged abuse by any priests or missionaries or anybody of religious orders here in this Southern District?
Our practice in this case is the same as in every case, which is that we're going to follow the evidence wherever it leads. So we have no particular prejudgment as to where that evidence might go. The agents are going to do a thorough job, as Special Agent in Charge Francis explained, and wherever that evidence leads is where the investigation and prosecution will go.
Not only this case, but other cases in general, as we've had reports, of course, of Southern District of Ohio for quite some time, with the church going back to the days when the Archdiocese pled guilty to not reporting these kind of abuses here.
It is always the case that if we have information indicating criminal conduct that would support a federal charge, then that matter will be investigated. And like I said, the protection of the most vulnerable is a serious priority for not just HSI, not just the U.S. Attorney's Office, but the United States generally. And so we're going to continue to exercise all of our diligence to make sure that we're doing that.
Given the serious allegations that there are in the Philippines, and given the history of those who abuse and repeat over and over again their abuse, what are your fears and what are your concerns, since he spent so much time coming back to this area?
Well, what we want to make sure of is we want to find out, are there any victims in the United States, in Cincinnati, in Ohio, Los Angeles, or wherever? And that's part of the purpose of showing his picture and providing the line for HSI. We want to make sure that if Father Hendricks has committed sexual abuse of children here, that we know about those victims, that we can get them the proper treatment and counseling, and that we can hold Father Hendricks accountable for any sexual abuse of children here, just as we want to hold him accountable for any sexual abuse that he's committed in the Philippines.
Are there any statute of limitations issues with time frame? I mean, his history with Cincinnati dates back to the 50s or 60s. And then is there also any jurisdictional issues with, like, if a victim were discovered here, would you be handling that, or would it be the county?
Let's see, to take the last question first, if a victim were to be found here and there's a federal crime that we can prove, then we'll prosecute it. If not, we will find out who is the most appropriate authority to do that prosecution, but it's certainly my interest to fully vindicate any federal interest in this and every case. Second, with respect to statute of limitations, I probably should have mentioned, but according to the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, the allegations of sexual abuse in the Philippines that are recited in that affidavit go back to 2009, and the most recent one that's referenced is the end of October of this year. Given that Father Hendricks has had trips to and from the United States all during that time, I'm not at this point concerned about any particular statute of limitations.
Even dating back to issues dating back to the 60s would be, depending on what the issues were, I guess.
We'd have to depend on the facts, and we'll do everything possible to, as I said, to make sure that any victims are vindicated.
Was there a time of year when he usually came back?
The summer.
The summer. Okay.
Just want to clarify the number of victims identified. You said 10 total, 4 have come forward?
So we gave two different numbers, and here's why. I am sticking to the information that is in the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, which is our charging document. according to that charging document, at the time that it was submitted, which was submitted and signed November 30th of this year, there were 5 victims who gave statements to HSI at that time. Special Agent in Charge Francis mentioned additional victims because this investigation is ongoing. And as he said, given the ongoing nature and given what HSI has discovered even since the affidavit was filed, there's reason to think that there could be additional victims, and we want to make sure that we cover the universe of victims.
Right, so it's 5 who have come forward since November 30th, or 10 total?
I will defer to Special Agent in Charge Francis with respect to the current number, but with respect to the number that are in the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, it was 5.
But for purposes of reporting accurately, should we say 10? So how many victims do we have that you know of?
So there's different reportings. So I can tell you for HSI, we have identified 10 victims. 5 are in the affidavit, and 5 other ones have come forward that are not in the complaint and are currently being interviewed and awaiting, the certification of the interview with the Filipino National Police.
When you read the affidavit that's filed with the complaint, what thoughts go through your mind when you read the kind of activity this man is allegedly accused of?
I mean, it's horrifying. It is horrible, horrible, abusive conduct. It is grooming children, young children, who were interested in being involved in church activities and taking those kids and sexually abusing them. As I said, the conduct is really, really serious. It kind of goes back to the question about why is it a federal charge? Because we've got a United States citizen overseas abusing children, we're going to prosecute that crime.
This office has prosecuted this type of case before, perhaps different circumstances, different victims, different accused. How does it rank? Is this the most serious we've ever seen, least serious? Is it?
Unfortunately, all of these cases are extremely serious. All child exploitation cases are extremely serious. I think this one, and they're all serious in different ways, in different particular ways. This is serious in part because of the length of time that we're talking about, because of the number of victims that we're talking about, because of the abuse of the position of trust that we're talking about. And it's also significant because, as Special Agent in Charge Francis was describing, in order to uncover the crime and bring these charges, it takes global coordination.
Let's take one more question.
What would you say to anyone who might be watching this today who feels that they were abused but is scared to come forward?
I would say please do come forward. The federal law enforcement is here to help you, protect you. We have people who are trained to deal with victims of sexual abuse. Any victims will be treated with the utmost care and discretion. We do have experience, unfortunately, with victims of this kind of abuse, and I think it's important, if those victims want to hold accountable the perpetrator, that they come forward and identify themselves to law enforcement. We will take care of them.
What's the age range of the victims who have been involved, identified?
They range from where abuse began at the age of 7 to the teens. Thank you.